The Empress returns by Iowa forever. Chapter 2.17, The Tombs of Solemnus. Twilight finished slipping her armor on, flexing her hand as her psychic power flowed through the circuits of her armor. Celestia had taught her a technique to use her magic to put her armor on hands-free, but there was something satisfying to doing everything by hand. At the very least, it kept her mind off of whatever it was the Eldar were on about. She was about to reach for her sword when she heard a knock on her door. Turning away from the weapon for a moment, she crossed and swung the door open. "Oh, hello Sister Bianca." "Good morning, Terra," Bianca said, giving Twilight a smile before moving a nervous-looking Angelique forward. "I was hoping that you might be able to help me with Angelique for a moment." "Well, I was going to meet the sisters for sparring," Twilight started. "But I'm always here to help. Please, come in." Bianca nodded in thanks before ushering Angelique in, the psyker mumbling something as she stepped past Twilight. "Warp travel has always been a bit difficult for Angelique," Bianca said, sitting Angelique down before turning her focus to Twilight. "You are more stable than she is, so you probably do not notice it, but her bouts of prophesying and wandering increase dramatically when we are in transit." Twilight frowned, stepping up to Angelique and kneeling to be on eye level with the girl. "The children of the dragon stare down the mare, and the son of the drake finds only loss," Angelique muttered, shying away as Twilight rested a hand on her cheek. "I spoke with Matthias about this back when she got the visions of the Tyranids," Twilight said, allowing a small bit of her magic to channel forward. "He wasn't willing to let me try then, but I have an idea of how best to help Angelique." "How so?" Bianca asked. "There's a school of magic the Empress taught me about memory spells," Twilight started, shifting so she could look the sister in the eye. "The basic premise is that memory is at least partially connected to the soul, with certain experiences and emotions so ingrained that even the most dedicated or twisted of opponents cannot shatter it completely." "How does it help clear away Angelique's madness?" "It's just a theory right now, but my theory is that if I can supplement what coherent thoughts she has with my own thoughts and memories of the two of us, or even my experiences with the others, then it might be what she needs to rebuild her psyche and stop prophesying all the time." "Claws dig deep into the light, and the mare is burdened by elements," Angelique said, shifting as if she were looking for a means to run around Twilight and back out the door. "I can understand why Matthias was hesitant to allow you to do this before," Bianca said, frowning. "No offense, Terra, but this seems rather dangerous. What is the risk that Angelique's psyche might collapse further, or if some other malediction befalls you during the process?" "I've done this before, I know it will work," Twilight countered. There was a lengthy pause before Bianca spoke again. You have?" "Yes, a variation, at least." Twilight looked away for a moment, feeling a chill run down her spine. "A few years ago, before the Empress started her mission and I met you all, a demon arrived and attacked my hometown. It had twisted my friends' minds, making them behave as their own antithesis. Honesty was replaced by falsehood, generous people became greedy, that sort of thing. Even I started to lose hope, drawing inward and willing to run away from everything." A pause as Angelique gave a small whimper, Twilight reaching out and giving the psyker's arm a stroke. "But the Empress showed me a better path," she continued. "She reminded me of all her teachings, of my own moments of strength when I overcame similar woes. She found what remained of my hope and understanding and stirred it within me again, and I broke through the demon's manipulations and used that experience to free my friends as well." Twilight gave Bianca a smile. "I know Angelique's troubles come from exposure to the warp at a young age, but if there is some fragment of who she was before then, if we can build off the good that she has experienced since then, maybe we might be able to clear her mind." Bianca gave Twilight an uneasy glance, clenching her hands together as she looked between her and Angelique. Finally she gave a small sigh, scooting back to give Twilight some more room. "Just don't do too much all at once, and please be careful," she said. "I have worked with many patients, and Angelique is special." "I know." Twilight turned back to Angelique, returning her hand to the psyker's cheek. "Angelique?" "The mare speaks, and the spark listens," Angelique said, her eyes flicking back to Twilight. "I just want you to focus on my magic right now," Twilight said, releasing a small amount of her power to collect around her hands. "Just feel it interacting with your own power. Don't reach out too far, just let it flow through you." Angelique gave an uncertain squeak, tensing up her shoulders as Twilight flexed her hand. "The mare," Angelique whispered. "The mare only wishes to help, can she?" "I'm going to try," Twilight said, giving Angelique a smile. "Just relax. Try to think of your time with Bianca, the good times. No fighting, no terrors, just peace." "The tides lash against the spark," Angelique said, but Twilight could see her shoulders relaxing. Can I stop hearing the tides?" That's what we're going to try. Twilight closed her eyes, delving down into her soul to draw up some memories of her own. A few moments of their dinners with Matthias and the others would be a good enough start, Twilight relaxing as he allowed a little more of her magic to brush against Angelique's psyche. Touching Angelique's soul in such a manner was like touching a wall. Twilight's soul could only go so far before running into a solid mass of pain, doubt, confusion. She furrowed her brow, shifting her thoughts to filter through the pain, the cries of the warp and of Angelique's memories, searching for a sign of some pleasant memory, some moment of light within the psycher's soul that could be used to break through the barrier. All she could find were flecks. Angelique, Twilight said, still keeping her hand on the other psycher's head. Is there anything you can remember from your childhood, maybe? Anything at all? Waves crash over the spark, but the light can burn through, Angelique said, shifting her head to one side. There was mother would not let me play in the fountain. A fountain? Twilight asked, still not opening her eyes. She could see an image drifting at the edge of the barrier, that of a little girl standing before a worn structure. The orphanage where Angelique lived before her powers developed had a small fountain used for church ceremonies, according to her records, Bianca said from behind Twilight. She mentions it sometimes. Angelique, think of the fountain, Twilight said. What was it about the fountain? Why did you want to play in it? It was. Angelique gave a childish giggle. It was so I never saw so much water. I did not know what it was, how it flowed like the tides that tear at me. I wanted to touch it, as I had seen the others. Tara, is it working? Angelique has never been this coherent for this long, Bianca said. Yes, I think it is. Twilight allowed a little more of her magic to reach out towards Angelique. Focus, Angelique. Let everything else fall away and just think of the fountain. Before the tides came in, before you became what you are now. I wanted to be like the others. Angelique smiled. I wanted her smile vanished, and she squirmed to get away from Twilight. The tides close in and the sons of the dragon draw closer. The darkness has a fell name, and destroys the legacy of the light. Something's wrong. Twilight's eyes snapped open as she reached up to take Angelique's head in both hands. The warp's acting up and drawing her back in. Angelique, can you hear me? The wall had turned to a storm, tendrils of energy lashing against Twilight's mind as she tried to bring Angelique back to stability. All she got besides the psycher's whimpering was more visions. She sees a red-skinned giant, face twisted in rage as he launches a bolt of lightning towards her. She sees a woman in gold armor, calmly sweeping a massive greatsword over her head. She sees herself, weeping as the barrel of a bolter rises slowly towards her head. And all she can hear is screaming. Twilight was thrown back, Bianca catching her as the floor beneath them lurched. Angelique screamed again, curling into a ball on the bed as the ship pitched again. That wasn't me. Something broke my concentration. It's a warp storm, Bianca cried, steadying Twilight as another tremor shook the vessel. The Geller field should hold the worst of the tides at bay, but Angelique will still be exposed. We need to calm her back down before things get worse. The ship pitched forward, Bianca staggering to the bed as she pulled a syringe from a pocket on her robe. A quick depressant should knock her out long enough for us to get her back. No. Twilight grabbed the syringe from Bianca's hand, using the next buck to put herself between the Hospitaller and the Psyker. I know that's how things are done around here, but using medication to knock out a rampant magic user is the last thing you want to do while her mind is so exposed. Tara, I have treated countless psychers since before you were born, Bianca snapped. Cutting off a psycher's exposure to the warp prevents further mental damage and can stifle any chance of a demon or worse taking hold of the psycher's soul. But severing a connection so abruptly can break parts of the soul and limit the effectiveness of a caster's magic in the long run. Twilight shot back, pausing before pushing the syringe back into Bianca's hand. Just let me calm her down first, then you can give her the shot. I'll only need a minute. Bianca hesitated, bracing herself as the ship lurched back and forth while Angelique continued to scream. Finally, she gave a nod. Calm her, then I will put her to sleep. Twilight nodded, turning back to Angelique and taking the young psycher's shoulders. Angelique thrashed, but her strength was little against Twilight's armor, even with the Sanguinium martyrs battered by the warp storm as it was. Twilight grimaced as she reached out with her magic, trying to break through the mess of pain and fear Angelique hurled against her soul. Perhaps now, she needed to let herself be vulnerable to lull Angelique's mind. Twilight took a breath, pressing against Angelique's soul as she dug through her memories for a moment of fear replaced by calm. Rin's word and Caesarea flew by, Twilight reaching further and further back to find something she could use to calm the young psycher. Memories of the Imperium soon gave way to Equestria, and for a brief instant Twilight could feel Angelique relaxing as the changing images flashed through her own mind. She drifted past the Crystal Empire, past the Changeling attack, past Discord's return. Those memories that rested between them, those that spoke of peace and friendship, of the good times she spent before the darkness, those she held on to, mirroring them to Angelique's mind so that her fear might abate. In some that she sent to the young psyker, she even risked placing Angelique within. See, Angelique? You don't need to be afraid. There is peace, calm, just come back to us, come back now. The Mare Angelique whispered, finally ceasing her struggles. She set me down in a calm field. Hush, Twilight, sleep, for the storm won't last much longer. Twilight opened her eyes just as Bianca jabbed the sedative into Angelique's neck, the psyker giving a small gasp as she slumped over into unconsciousness. As if on cue, the ship itself stopped bucking, Twilight and Bianca slouching as they tried to catch their breath. That was rougher than normal, Bianca said, wiping some sweat from her brow. But, thanks to you, I think Angelique will be resting easy for some time now. I certainly hope so, Twilight replied, gently lowering the sleeping psyker down onto her bed. When I get back to Equestria, I definitely need to speak to Luna about more mental magic training. Terra, Bianca started. Some of the things Angelique said. Is Twilight another name she has for you? Twilight hesitated, looking up to the Hospitaller as she tried to think of the right words to say, whatever would not implicate her as a pony in Bianca's eyes. She did not need another person to look down on her because of her origins. It was she started. It was a nickname I had, back on my homeworld. My friends, they all called me Twilight. I see. There was a pause before Bianca offered a half-hearted smile. It is fitting, though. Oh. Thank you. They had no chance to continue before Bianca's vox crackled. Bianca? Matthias called over the vox. Bianca, are you there? This is Bianca, the Hospitaller replied. I am with Terra, and we've managed to sedate Angelique. Oh good. The Inquisitor replied. The warp storm seems to have only done superficial damage, so I will need you to make sure Angelique is fully secured. And can you send Terra up to the bridge? I would like to have a word with her. What is it, Matthias? Twilight asked, rising to her feet. Is it about the warp storm? Not exactly, we've reached Solemnus. Matthias had seen countless worlds over the course of his life. Hive worlds, choked with refuse from billions of souls. Forge worlds scarred by vast Mechanicus facilities. Blasted death worlds where men scraped by in harsh storms and burning rad deserts. Feral worlds teeming with vicious life forms that could tear apart even the mightiest of warriors with little effort. Pasture worlds and feudal worlds, with their gentle rolling hills and quaint villages. Even world falling under the sway of the Tau, abandoned paradise worlds marked with the twisting spires of the Eldar or overrun by greenskins or Tyranids, all molded into alien shapes unthinkable to civilized men. He had seen countless worlds, and yet nothing matched the sheer, unnatural wrongness that was Solemnus. It spun lazily in its orbit, slowly circling a star that by all readings should have collapsed in on itself back when humanity first mastered fire. It was a perfect sphere of dark metal, marked only by thin lines of glowing green hieroglyphs he could barely make out. While it did possess the thin glow of an atmosphere, he saw no clouds, no forests, nothing that would indicate that there was air on the planet, and yet there it was. Its gravity was far too low for a planet of its size, more akin to Terra than the Neptune-sized behemoth that hung before the Sanguinium martyrs, and what satellites it possessed spun in their own orbits rather than adhering to the rules of normal orbits. All the more reason that Matthias' hand had not left his bolt pistol since they broke through the warp storm and arrived here. Not that it would do much against the Necrons. We are approaching Solemnus at speed, my lord, the captain said from behind him. Orders? Slow to cruising speed, and move all power from the guns, Matthias said, his eyes not leaving the image of the tomb world before him. The last thing we need is for the Xenos to blast us to scrap before we even have a chance to make our case. Yes, my lord. The cruiser shuddered as it decelerated, Matthias' hand twitching again as he watched the tomb world. Obviously the Necrons spotted his ship when they broke out of the warp, but no ship or signal had risen to counter their approach. Perhaps they were waiting to see if he had come alone or given the reputation of the Lord of Solemnus, Matthias was being taunted. Matthias? Matthias did not turn as Twilight came up behind him, her boots clanking against the deck. Is everything all right? As much as it can be given the circumstances, he said. The Empress put you at the head of this mission, so if we are hailed it would be good if you made first connections with our partners. If you think that's best, Twilight replied. You talked down a Primarch and bested a demon, Twilight, Matthias countered. Speaking to a Xenos abomination will be simple. You're taking this a lot better than I thought you would. It's about all I can do to keep myself from declaring exterminatus. There was a pause before he sighed. So many Inquisitors have died trying to take Solemnus. I've been praying that we don't become another casualty. They said nothing more before a warning klaxon rang through the ship. My lord. We are detecting energy signatures ahead, similar to warp exits. Reverse engines and bring us to a stop, then open comms. He could hear Twilight opening her mouth to raise an objection, but that died as 10 ships flashed into being before them. Each one was easily double the size of the Sanguinium Martyrs, great crescent-shaped vessels looming down on the cruiser like a pack of carnivorous beasts cornering a fawn. He could see squadrons of smaller craft swarming beneath the shadows, fighter craft of similar design to the dreadnoughts bearing down on him. Moment of truth. Empress, protect us all. There was a burst of static followed by a harsh voice, the speaker spitting every syllable as if they were all curses. Given what little he knew of the native language of the Necrons, they probably were. This is the Sanguinium Martyrs, cruiser of the Ordo Xenos on a diplomatic mission to the Lord of Solemnus. We humble ourselves before your might. Another pause before the same voice spoke, in Gothic this time. What business does your ilk have with Solemnus? Why have fleas come to trifle with the lords of the Necroner? My lord, Twilight stepped forward. I am called Terra, personal student of the Empress of Mankind, Lord of the Imperium of Man. I have come to barter and exchange gifts with the ruler of Solemnus, and seek only safe passage that this task may be complete. Matthias said nothing, watching in silence as Twilight took command. The Empress had chose her student well, pony or not. There was another burst of static before a new voice chimed in. Apologies, my dear, a smooth, metallic voice echoed through the bridge. My underlings can be so temperamental, even in the best of times. I see. Twilight shifted on her feet, giving a nervous glance towards Matthias. Don't be intimidated now. Are you the Lord of Solemnus? Come now, fair child, Lord of Solemnus is but a title, the voice chuckled. You may call me Trizin the Infinite, Archaeavist of the Solemnus Galleries, Keeper of 10,000 Secrets. From what I understand you are called Terra, correct? She looked to Matthias again. Yes? Such a quaint name. Fitting for one as well spoken as you are, no? The voice chuckled before continuing. But you are here on business from your Empress. What need have you of pleasantries and japes? What may I offer you, dear Terra? Twilight squirmed at this. The Necron was flattering her, sure enough, but Matthias knew she took grand formalities poorly. I have a gift from the Empress, Lord Trizin, she started once she had regained her composure. My orders are to barter it for the Unbound Flame, if you are willing to treat with us. The Unbound Flame, eh? A pause. Now that is an interesting choice of a relic, my dear. Your Empress must find it to be of great value. Another pause, Matthias chewing his lip in preparation for things to go further south. But I suppose I might be willing to part with it for the right price. Very well, bring your ship into orbit and come down. I would love a chance to show you my collection in case there is more that might catch your fancy. As soon as the voice departed, 5 of the battleships cornering the Sanguinium Martyrs flashed out of view, the others parting to allow the cruiser to pass. Matthias' hand remained clamped around the handle of his bolt pistol. If anything, it gave him a fleeting amount of comfort. Are Necrons normally this polite? Twilight asked, looking at Matthias. We're too busy shooting at each other to exchange pleasantries, as is typical of Xenos, Matthias said. This one, though, is known for making a mockery of decorum to disarm his opponents. His collection probably has several dozen beings that weren't so alert to his manipulations trapped inside. Twilight swallowed, clasping her hands together in front of her as she averted her gaze. As satisfying as it was to see that she was getting a healthy fear of the alien in this universe, Matthias did not wish for her to become too nervous. Just be on alert when you're down there, he said, his voice softening. Expect the Necron to double-cross you when you appear to be at your most vulnerable. I have some experience with that, Twilight said, unclasping her hands before continuing. You're not coming? Someone needs to be here in the event you need an extraction, Matthias explained, looking down at himself still dressed in his inquisitorial robes. Also, robes are not good defense against Necron weaponry. I'd rather not delay too much lest our hosts decide looting our dead bodies is more prudent. Oh. A pause before Twilight gave a weak smile. I suppose I'll have the sisters in Meerschaum, but your experience in these sorts of things is pretty substantial. I'd be more comfortable if you were there to make sure I didn't overstep things. I know, Matthias nodded. But if you're going to be the leader the Empress wants you to be, you'll need to step forward even if things are not set as you desire. There was a lengthy pause, Twilight wringing her hands again as she looked around the bridge. I know, she said finally. It wouldn't be the first time, really. I guess it's just nerves right now. I should probably get going, then. Twilight turned to leave, Matthias allowing her to pass by before another thought came to mind. Terra? He said, turning slightly so he could meet eyes with her. Be careful down there. I will, Twilight nodded. You've taught me a lot about that, haven't you? And with that she was gone, stepping through the door and down the hall while Matthias turned his attention back to Solemnus before them. He tried to allow some of the tension in his body to ebb, but to little avail as he watched the Necron ships arranging themselves over the planet. Matthias was no stranger to feeling powerless, but why was it digging into him now? Orders, my lord? The ship's captain asked. Keep us in a stable orbit, he replied. And make sure comms, teleportation fields, and our warp drive are ready in the event we have to flee. There's nothing here we can leave to chance. As you command, my lord. There was little conversation as the shuttle made its way down to the surface of Solemnus. The sisters had not said much, keeping off to the side as Errol's tech thralls prepped Celestia's gift from arrival. Meerschain watched over them all, the Astartes' expression unknowable behind his helmet, though from the way he gripped his spear he too seemed to have some tension behind him. All Twilight could do for now was stand off to the side and brood. Matthias had told her to be careful. That was all well and good when dealing with Tyranids or the like, but this Trizon had been polite when they had arrived. Thoughts of her and her friends confronting discord crossed her mind, but even he had a certain amount of malice behind his words and actions. Either the Necron really was being polite, or he was greater at hiding his emotions than Celestia on a particularly stressful day. If her fears and Matthias' warnings were anything to go by, probably the latter. So engrossed was Twilight in her worry that she almost did not notice Meerschain crossing to her. Miss Terra, he said, his voice muffled by his helmet. If you so desire, we can handle the parley from here. No, it has to be me, Twilight said quickly. This Trizon, he expects me to be there I think. I don't know, this is the first big diplomatic mission I've had to do on my own so I'm kind of nervous right now. Understatement of the year, a small voice that sounded a lot like Rainbow Dash echoed in Twilight's mind, but she shook her head to clear it away. By all accounts you did well in gaining our right to speak with this creature. I have no doubt that you will see the unbound flame return to its rightful owners. A pause, Meerschain looking down at Twilight. Even if you do not have faith, I and your friends have more than enough. I know. A pause before Twilight quirked a smile at the Forgefather. You don't have to keep yourself separate from the others. You're my friend too, you know. I understand. Meerschain nodded. As I am an Astartes, I do find myself outside of most human norms. He paused before resting a hand on Twilight's shoulder. But I am honored that you consider me your friend. Twilight smiled more fully, reaching up and giving Meerschain's hand a pat. They had no chance to say more before the ship lurched slightly, old metal creaking before coming to a rest. We have arrived. Magos Errol's voice droned. The relic has been prepared for delivery. I and my tech thralls will be remaining here in the event you need to return to the ship. The tech thralls backed away from the box, having moved it onto a small dolly for ease of transportation. Naomi and her sisters had taken point, forming a rough semicircle in front of Twilight and the box while Meerschain moved around behind the gift. Twilight's hand rested on the hilt of her sword, taking a few breaths as the loading door swung open and gave them their first look at Solemnus. Phalanxes of metal skeletons waited for them, assembled so not a single one was out of line. Most were armed with what appeared to be glass tubes filled with green lightning, while others near the front carried double-barreled versions of the same. Still others were equipped with hexagonal shields and short swords, and a small collection carried long staves tipped with wide axe-like blades. Small machines resembling oversized beetles scurried beneath their legs, but the phalanxes remained completely motionless despite the disturbances and the presence of the humans. All save the leader of the phalanxes. He towered over the others, and would have been at eye level with Meerschain were they to stand face to face. His chest was painted blue save for a golden sigil similar to the shields of his guards. The armor swept upward to give him the semblance of a hood, holding up a cape of black metal scales that made him appear more massive than he probably was. He carried a long stave with a wide blade on top, the circuitry glowing with similar energy to that which rested within the weapons of the lesser Necrons. And as impossible as it was, the metal skeleton seemed to grin as Twilight made her way down the gangplank. Welcome, he said, sweeping his arms wide towards his army. Welcome to Solemnus, student of the Empress of Mankind. Thank you, Twilight replied, stepping up to behind Sister Naomi. I presume you are Trizon? As there would be any other, my dear student. The Necron chuckled, moving to peer over the Sister Superior and down at Twilight. My, you are quite a beauty, aren't you? If we met under different circumstances you would make a fine centerpiece for my collection. Try it, and I will rip your head from your body, Xenos, Naomi snapped, raising her combi flamer towards Tristan's face. The Necron regarded the sister superior for a moment before casually pushing the weapon out of his face. As I said, different circumstances. Tristan replied, his eyes flickering as he looked back to Twilight. You should be proud to have such dedicated guardians, good student. So difficult to come by these days, no? I suppose. Twilight was unsure if Tristan was being sincere or not, so she decided to err on the edge of caution. We have a gift for you, that we wish to exchange for the unbound flame. So you have told me. I am quite eager to see what it is. Tristan brushed past the sisters, gliding towards the box as Meerschain stepped forward. I don't suppose it's you, is it? No. The salamander growled, his voice dripping with more malice than Twilight knew he possessed. You have tried to steal our relics countless times. You will not have the satisfaction of claiming them from me. I will take that as a no, Tristan replied, peeking around Meerschain to spot the box. Ah, that must be it, then. Yes, Twilight stepped up at the Necron Lord ran his hand across the wood. The Empress of Mankind sends her regards. And I thank her for her generosity. Tristan fell silent, tracing some of the patterns along the wood. Oh, I know what this is. It's a Terran puzzle box, no? 25th millennium, carved from Paradisia oak, if I am not mistaken. You Twilight started, her hands tightening again. You're familiar with this? Yes, unfortunately, I have several in my collection, all of which I solved centuries ago. Twilight's heart dropped at Tristan's disappointment. Celestia would never send her off with a gift that someone already had knowingly, at least. Well, I suppose allowing you to leave unscathed will suffice for the gift. Tristan ran his hand across the box, flipping a few panels and switches on the box. All I need to do is move these pieces here, and it will pause, the Necron bringing his free hand to his chin. No? Interesting. He flipped the pieces he moved back to their original position and tried again, turning a few other pieces to no avail. Twilight watched in silence, her tension barely ebbing as she tried to gauge what Tristan's next move was. For several minutes Tristan fussed over the box, slowly circling as he tried to find a means to open the puzzle box. Twilight and the others stepped back to give him more room, Ruth and Rebecca glancing towards the rest of the Necrons in the event they moved to engage. They seemed content to watch their leader inspecting his new prize, but their unblinking gazes offered little comfort. Finally, Tristan spoke again. I owe you and your Empress an apology, my dear, the Necron said, turning and resting his hand on the box. This is quite the gift you have presented me. I shall find great joy in deciphering its secrets in due time. He stepped away from the box, Twilight watching as a small scarab ran to a central point on the object. There was a pause before 4 bolts of green electricity whipped around the box, spinning around it before folding back on themselves to leave only empty air. Some kind of teleportation technology that doesn't use warp energy. Interesting. Then you will barter for the unbound flame? Twilight asked. Of course, Tristan chuckled, sweeping his cape behind him as his phalanxes spread out to give him room. Oh, I am so glad that I have found someone who is as appreciative of arts and history as I am. Come, let me show you my collection. Tristan strode onward, oblivious to the fact that Twilight and her group had not fallen in step behind him. Well, at least we're not dead yet, Judith chirped through her vox. Terra, you should catch up with him before he uses whatever Xenos tech he used to move that box to capture us. Yes, of course. Twilight nodded, looking back towards Meerschain. I suppose you're coming with us? Or do you think it best to watch the ship? I must be there to recover the unbound flame, the salamander said. And, perhaps, finally put an end to this creature once and for all. Twilight could do without the violence, but did not say anything more as she started after Tristan, jogging to catch up with the Necron as he continued his walk. It is a rare time when I get to show visitors my collection as it is meant to be seen, Tristan said, not bothering to turn and face Twilight as she took a position behind him. Far too often the visitors here try to shoot me. Quite rude, don't you think? Why yes, Twilight stammered. As one that appreciates the finer things of life, it pleases me that there are others that share my sentiments. They approached a large monolith, the structure bedecked with glowing runes and a large gate of green energy. This is the entrance to the human galleries. Go on in, the portal is quite safe. How do we know you won't just teleport us all to different places so we are divided? Naomi said, coming up behind Tristan. If I had wished to do that you would have noticed by now. Well, come along, I have so much to show you. Tristan stepped through first, taking Twilight's hand in his own as he entered the portal. Twilight opened her mouth to protest, trying and failing to dig her heels in as the alien robot dragged her through the portal, but her protest died when she came out the other side. The cavernous hall they entered was unlike any museum Twilight had seen before. Rows upon rows of statues and displays filled her vision, all lit up with the same green energy the Necrons seemed fond of. Not just statues, but racks of old swords and guns stacked and perfectly categorized, paintings and tapestries hanging in thin air, even a few life-size dioramas of great heroes battling against orcs, tyranids, and other creatures. Twilight took a sharp breath, rushing towards the display of a custode standing at attention, the warrior's gaze forever fixed to a point on the horizon. "Wow," she whispered. "I've never seen statues with such detail." "Only the finest for my collection," Trizin said, drifting around a display of Akkadian generals standing proudly over a slain Chaos Space Marine. "This one here I took from the first fall of Cadia. Good thing too, for he'd almost fall into that silly warlord your people kept worrying about." "Really?" Twilight crossed back, watching as faint wisps of smoke rose from the statue's cigar. "How did you manage to capture this moment, then? And the cigar, it looks so real. What did you use to create the smoke?" "Oh, a stasis grenade and some creative liberties, nothing too extravagant." Twilight's wonder died instantly as the Necron chuckled. That's really him, then?" she stammered, stepping back from the statue as if it were Nightmare Moon reborn. "If you're collecting something, why settle for pale imitations when you can have the real thing?" Trizin chuckled again as he continued onward. "Ah, but that's not even the best part of my collection. Come. I have the sword that won the Feast of Blades around here somewhere, or was it the 5th? Your Astartes do like to hold on to their relics for longer than most would find healthy." Twilight whimpered, shying away as she took in the hundreds of similar displays that surrounded her. She wanted to run, to go back through the portal and teleport to her room on the Sanguinium Martyrs and tell Matthias he was right and she was wrong, and then they could get out and never come back here. "Hera?" Twilight yelped and spun around, making eye contact with Rebecca as she and the others finished crossing through the portal. "What happened? Where's the Xenos?" She started, working her jaw before letting loose. "He froze people and turned them into statues. That is what makes this Xenos so despicable," Mershan said, striding up to the statue of the Cadian. "He takes warriors and heroes in their moments of triumph or greatest need and stores them here, for no greater purpose than he can. Many times he has tried to take the weapons and armor I wear from those who previously held the title of Forgefather, and there are perhaps countless numbers he has killed or slighted in his efforts to claim them or their relics." Twilight choked, staggering back as Rebecca and Judith reached out to her. "Then, we have to stop him," Twilight said, "get the Empress to come and set everyone free." "Oh, there must be hundreds of people in here." She tried taking a few deep breaths to calm herself, but to no avail. Finally, Judith spoke. "Hera, I know this is horrifying," she said. "But remember why we're here. We need to recover the relic first, then we can take vengeance on this alien. Is that okay?" Twilight choked, but deep down she knew the sister was right. She gave a feeble nod, straightening herself up as the sisters stepped back to give her some room. "Did I just advocate for restraint in regards to dealing with Xenos?" "I think so," Ruth replied. "Even for you, that's unnatural." "What's unnatural?" Ruth yelped and spun, aiming her bolter at Trizin's head as the Necron Lord drifted out of the shadows. "I sense that this is going to be a recurring event for our tour, is it?" "Maybe you shouldn't sneak up on us," Twilight snapped, stepping forward to be between Trizin and her friends. "What kind of host are you that you try to scare your guests like that? If you take some offense in my mannerisms, I do apologize for any discomfort I may have caused." Hollow words considering Trizin had living people trapped in his collection, but Twilight did not want to directly address that, at least until they got the Unbound Flame. Then rebuking could begin in earnest. "Now then, let's find the Unbound Flame." Trizin took up his stave and strode back into the gloom, Twilight and her companions following slowly behind. "As you can see, I have many different relics from across your history. For being such a primitive species, you have generated so many fascinating items and figures during your time among the stars." "Of course," Twilight said, eyeing a display of a squad of space marines battling against some brightly colored Eldar. "Collecting them has been a bit hazardous at times," Trizin continued. "The Unbound Flame, for instance, I found in the hold of some Wraykol pirates many centuries ago. Fascinating if brutish creatures, the Wraykol, they can be simple-minded, but they do have an innate skill for improvisation, much like humans now that I think of it." A pause before he laughed. "They smell worse, though. Ah, here's something I think you will appreciate." Twilight said nothing as Trizin stepped aside, revealing a glass box that could easily be the ground floor of a large building. Inside were assembled dozens of Necrons, some marching in their phalanxes while others were modeled bursting from the ground to attack sisters. Naomi breathed, Twilight following her vision to spot small groups of black-clad women arranged in battle against the aliens. My latest display, the massacre of Sanctuary 101, Trizin said, his voice dripping with pride. Sadly, I could not find originals, so I had to improvise. Thankfully, the Xandriac dynasty were more than willing to lend some of their subjects to the display. They shot my surrogate a few times, but that is only a minor issue. You are a monster, Xenos. Naomi growled, turning towards the Necron. You captured sisters for your sick collection. I have been called worse, Trizin said, turning away with a dismissive wave. It's still a work in progress, though, but perhaps you might like to see it in its completion someday. I'd rather not, Twilight muttered, her hand falling to her sword as they continued further. Okay, definitely need to come back and save everyone. Ah, a pity. I'd like to have your opinions on the matter. Trizin quickened his pace. Twilight tried keeping her eyes on the Trizin, but kept finding her eyes drifting towards rows upon rows of trapped soldiers and lost relics. After all that she had seen, all she had done, she could not just leave them like this. Even Discord did not trap ponies in stone. My lord Trizin, she started. Yes, my dear? Trizin replied, stopping and turning to face the group. Your collection, Twilight said, gesturing to the nearby display of a freshly severed head in a jar. Would you ever consider, I don't know, letting go some of your collection? This, Trizin stepped up to Twilight, looming over her until he all but blocked out the light above her. Are you suggesting that you wish to steal from my collection? The Necron growled. I am wounded, child, wounded, that someone like you would think to betray my hospitality for their own gain. No, nothing like that, Twilight said quickly, backing up to put some space between her and Trizin. I mean, have you ever considered setting some of your prizes free? By your own volition? Set them free? Trizin asked, stepping back and raising his free hand to his chin. You mean, be the hero and let your champions back upon the world, to battle for the fate of your species? Yes, that's exactly what I mean, Twilight said, allowing a small smile. There was another pause as Trizin considered Twilight's words, drumming his fingers against his chin. Finally, he laughed. Oh, my dear child, you are so amusing with your silly ideas, he chuckled, oblivious as Twilight's smile vanished. Me, letting go of my collection. Oh, that is funny. You humans and your amusing ideas, but I am losing track of our purpose. Look ahead, and you will see the unbound flame. A bit closer than I remember, but then I've been busy, Twilight gasped as the Necron stepped up to the display. It appeared to be a coffin, large enough that she and the sisters could all fit comfortably inside if asked, held about a foot off the ground in some kind of anti-gravity field. The main piece was a dark green color, the seams inlaid with gold and small pieces of obsidian. The cover was decorated with a carving of a dragon's skull over a roaring flame, both framed by two ribbons decorated with a script Twilight could not understand. Promethean, maybe? Even in the low light of the tomb world it seemed to sparkle, shimmering as if it were made of a true flame. Twilight stepped up, running her hand across the coffin before drawing back. It's warm, she said. Why is it so warm? It is blessed by Vulcan's forge, Mershan said, stepping up next to Twilight. It by Terra, it is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. It is one of my favorites, when I venture into this part of my collection, Trizin said from behind them. Well, this has turned out better than I hoped. My curiosity has returned again, I should wander these halls more often. Hush, Xenos, Mershan said, reaching up to touch the unbound flame for himself. Twilight had stepped back to allow the Forgefather some room, watching in silence as he traced very curve, every line carved into the metal of the unbound flame. He whispered something, again in a language Twilight did not know, but speaking any more felt improper. It would have been best to leave him to his rapture. But so caught up was Twilight in the moment, that she almost missed Judith's warning. Terra, look out. Twilight spun, a psychic shield already forming as a fist-sized silver ball arched through the air towards her. The shield was quick, catching the ball and deflecting it off to one side, Twilight watching as it bounced away before exploding into a flurry of green lightning. Two display racks of weapons were caught by the lightning, flickering for several moments before winking out of existence, only shadows in the dark to mark they were ever there. The shield spread out, expanding to cover the sisters and the unbound flame as all the humans centered on Twilight. This left a slightly embarrassed-looking Trizin on his own, the Necron quickly tucking his hand back under his cloak. Well, that didn't work as I had hoped. What didn't work? Twilight cried, using her free hand to draw her sword. What were you trying to do to my friends? I admit, I should have voiced such concerns before acting, but one of the joys of collecting is in the action rather than the hassle, Trizin said, in a tone more befitting rarity, discussing thread counts than a robotic overlord. As we were talking, I thought to myself, the Unbound Flame is such a unique artifact, I would loathe to trade it for something so commonplace. But you were impressed by the puzzle box. You said it yourself. Oh indeed, I was. Trizin straightened himself up before continuing. That and your ship would probably have been enough to cover the trade, but then you presented me with these fine specimens, 5 Sisters of Battle and the Forgefather of the Salamanders with all his relics. I could almost finish Massacre of Sanctuary 101, and maybe start on that Polyphemus 4 reenactment I'd been thinking about. All noble displays, if I do say so myself. No they aren't, Twilight strengthened her shield. It's sick, and I will not have you threaten my friends like that. They would be well taken care of, trust me. Trizin stepped forward, poking the shield with his free hand. My, this is an interesting shield you're projecting. Don't come any closer, or I'll. Please, student, don't make idle threats around me. Trizin drew his hand back under his cloak, withdrawing a few more spheres like the one he had tried to use earlier. Now, here is my offer, your friends for the Unbound Flame. You will be able to leave this planet and its orbit, return to whatever world you came from first, and we can all go in peace. Is that fair, to trade the lives of your friends for the fate of your empire? No. Twilight glared, feeling as more power built up inside her. Nothing, no empire or relic, is worth the life of my friends. Now Miss Terra, please try to think. Trizin never finished, for Twilight's magic had built up before snapping forward. A solid beam of purple light shot forward, engulfing the Necron's torso as the shrieking sound of tearing metal filled the air. The bolt dissipated, showing that all that remained were 2 wobbly metal legs, Twilight giving a small gasp as the legs tipped over and fell with a clatter. You, Veronica stammered. You killed it. He will return. Meerschaum said, drawing the spear of Vulcan before stabbing it into the ground just in front of the Unbound Flame. Necrons are rarely destroyed for good, and Trizin is one of the most crafty. Come, we must free the Unbound Flame before he recovers. What do we need to do? Twilight asked, dropping her shield and hurrying to the Forgefather. The Necrons have a stasis field around the Unbound Flame. I can cut the circuits, but you will need to hold off any energy or defense mechanisms that might fight against me. How? I know nothing about electronics of this intricacy. But the Necrons are blind to the warp, your psychic powers should baffle their defenses well enough. Hurry. Twilight nodded, crouching down next to Meerschaum and reaching out with her magic towards the cuts he had made. She could feel something pressing against her, the very metal stitching itself back together even beneath the intense heat from Meerschaum's spear. Twilight increased her strength, pressing back against the metal as the Forgefather cut, and soon the process of self-repair within the circuit had begun to slow. Meerschaum worked his way around the Unbound Flame, Twilight expanding her magic to keep up with the Astartes. Soon the field around the coffin began to flicker, the coffin wobbling in the air as they continued their work. The repair cycle within the planet picked up, a few scarabs scurrying out to try and help, but Twilight's magic was enough to flick them away without much difficulty. Finally something gave, the field winking out and the Unbound Flame hitting the ground with a dull thud. Perfect. Meerschaum said, setting his spear aside for a moment. Now, to get it back to the surface. I can teleport us out, Twilight offered. No, Miss Terra. The distance is too far, and the Necrons no doubt have devices set up to block your teleportation. But there must be an entrance by which we may. Terra. We've got contact. Twilight stood up and turned, raising her shield in front of the sisters just as a phalanx of Necrons materialized in front of them, led by a very frustrated-looking Trizin. Now that was completely uncalled for, my dear, Trizin said. I understand your concern, but there is no need to resort to violence. You're trying to kidnap my friends, Twilight snapped. That's a perfectly good reason to protect them. And that is admirable, if a bit misplaced, but I do wish that we can maintain our relationship past this minor disagreement. He stepped forward again, this time flanked by 2 of the larger Necrons armed with swords and shields. Lower your shield and turn over your companions, and we can work out a mutually beneficial exchange. No, never, Twilight said, strengthening her shield once more. My friends are not expendable. No human is in my eyes. You might just see us as curiosities, but humanity is far greater than anything you might capture. Yes, I've heard all this before, Trizin said, his hand clenching in frustration. Do not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Get out of our way and let us leave with the original exchange, and it won't be. There was a lengthy pause, the Necron Lord regarding Twilight for several moments. He was about to speak when a warning klaxon echoed through the hall, a droning sound that sent a chill down Twilight's back. "Oh, what is it now?" Trizin grumbled, turning away from Twilight and staring out into the black. "Oh, I see. Well, I suppose that might be of interest." He turned back to Twilight. "I'm sorry, my dear, but I must be going. Other matters have come up, but I'm sure everything will be resolved." "So, you'll let us leave?" Twilight asked. "On the contrary." He turned back to his phalanx. "Kill them all, but do try to leave their relics intact. I'd rather not make this day a total loss." As Trizin teleported off to parts unknown, Twilight braced as the other Necrons stepped forward and brought their guns to bear. Green lightning raced forward, exploding across Twilight's shield as she poured more power into her defense. The sisters stepped up in front of her, Rebecca and Veronica opening fire with their bolters while Naomi's combi flamer unleashed a torrent of burning promethium. Twilight stepped back to allow the sisters more room, keeping her magic steady as she looked for a means to escape. "Mirtion, do you see an exit?" she asked as another bolt of Necron firepower crashed against her shield. "No, but one cannot be too far off," the Forgefather said. "I cannot carry the unbound flame myself. Do you know much telekinesis?" "Of course," Twilight replied. "But that might cause the shield to fail. We'll need to be quick about the transfer of power before I can carry that out." "We shall protect you, Terra," Ruth called. "As you have been our shield, so let us be yours." "Empress tits, die already you stupid Xenos." "Judith. Blasphemy." Twilight fought back her blush as she tried to shift her energy, reaching towards the unbound flame while also keeping the shield focused. Some bolts of Necron firepower slipped through the barrier, but none were even close to hitting the sisters, Mirtion, or herself. She had almost reached a stable energy level when her vox crackled. "Ara!" Matthias' voice called. "Terra, what's going on down there?" "Trizin betrayed us and tried to capture Mirtion and the sisters." Twilight called back. "Please don't say you warned me, because I get it, you warned me and I wasn't careful enough. The fact that you're still somewhat calm means things haven't spiraled completely out of control." Matthias replied. "What's your extraction plan?" "Mirtion told me not to teleport, so I'm not," she said, watching as Ruth fired a burst of shells into the chest of an advancing Necron, only for the creature's arms to knit back on as if nothing had happened. "Can you find somewhere where we can get into open air and then maybe we can get past whatever wards Trizin has?" "Well, that's going to be difficult," Matthias said. "A Chaos battle fleet just broke out of the warp and is heading straight for Solemnus. I can get to you, but you're still going to have to fight your way out if we're not all dead from the crossfire." Chapter 2.18, Angels of Death, Part 1. "What? Are you safe?" Twilight cried. "You're the one getting shot at by Necrons and you're asking if I'm safe?" Matthias replied. "Regardless, we've moved into a narrower orbit near the southern hemisphere of Solemnus, that should keep us out of sight of the Necrons and the traitors long enough for you to get out of there. We're scanning the planet now to see if we can direct you to an exit. We can always try for the portal we came through to get here," Twilight offered. "Assuming that the Xenos did not scramble its programming so you can't get out." There was a pause, Twilight feeling a tremor running through the ground beneath her feet. "What Tory? The traitors managed to get a few ships through and it ships at the planet." "What? Matthias, I can't hear you." "The traitors are literally throwing ships at the planet. I just saw a squadron of them make a run through the Necron fleet and crash into the surface." A pause. "We've been spotted. I guess we didn't move out of sight enough. I'll alert Magos Errol to scan for you when you make it to the surface. Be careful out there." "I will." Twilight closed the Vox and turned back to the others. "Girls, we've got traitors incoming." "Let them come," Ruth bellowed, smashing her bolter into the face of a Necron that got too close. "The Empress' wrath burns in my soul, and I shall be happy to let it shine for Xenos and heretics alike. But failing our mission because we did not get the unbound flame to the Empress will do us no good," Naomi snapped, reloading as she ducked closer to the unbound flame. "Do you have a way out?" "Sort of," Twilight replied, giving the Sister Superior a sheepish grin. "We need to get back to the portal we came through to get here. Once we get back to the surface we'll return to the ship and get out of this system." "How are we supposed to do that?" Veronica cried, ducking down as a bolt of Gauss fire carved through one of her pauldrons. "We are skilled, but not skilled enough to fight through so many Necrons." "I have a plan," Twilight said, looking through the phalanx. "When I give the signal, start running towards the portal. I'll do what I can to clear us a path." But what if the Necrons have tampered with the portal when we get there? Judith asked. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Everyone get ready, this is going to be rough. Yes, Terra. Twilight shifted her magic around once more, building up power once more. The Necrons still could not break through her shield, so correcting that to push forward and knock them down would give them enough time to move towards the portal and perhaps take some of their attackers out of the equation. She might need to set the unbound flame down, but picking it back up would not be too difficult. You can do this, Twilight, she thought. Maybe you might be able to snag a few more relics on the way out? Okay now. The sisters broke cover as Twilight thrust her hand forward, her shield shifting to a single wall and racing towards the phalanx. The Necrons realized the danger but were too slow to react, only a few managing to move back before the purple barrier smashed into them, limbs and guns flying about as Twilight's magic blasted on through. Judith and Meerschaum took point, their flamers burning the Necrons before they could reassemble properly. Twilight came next, the unbound flame grasped in her telekinesis as she hurried as quickly as she could. Ruth, Veronica, and Rebecca took up the rear, their bolters clattering as they tried to keep down any Necrons that the front ranks had missed. To Twilight's dismay, that was quite a few of the machines. They were halfway to the portal when the ground shook once more. Twilight gave a yelp, almost dropping the unbound flame as her magic flickered from her broken concentration. Ruth rushed to her to steady her, the two holding fast as the tremors died down once more. That's no kind of ordnance I'm familiar with, the sisters said as they started moving again. Matthias said the fleet's literally throwing ships at the planet, Twilight replied, shifting her shield as a rank of Necrons teleported to her left. I have no idea why, but it's certainly not making our escape any easier. Let us not think too long on the strategy of traitors, Meerschaum said from up front, just as he stabbed a larger Necron through the chest with his spear. The machine staggered back, already healing from the wound the Forgefather had given it, but could not retaliate before the spear's blade went through its head. For what it was worth, for an identical Necron stepped up as the wounded one was whisked away for repairs. This one got under Meerschaum's next strike, deflecting it with its shield before slashing upward with its sword. Meerschaum stumbled back, blasting the Necron in the face with his gauntlet as he inspected the cut along his abdomen. Meerschaum. Are you all right? Twilight asked, rushing to the Forgefather's side. I have suffered far worse, he replied, pulling himself to his full height as the Necrons closed in, battering against Twilight's shifted shield. I am sorry that I have not been of more use to you in this endeavor. Believe me, you've been beyond helpful. Twilight thrust her power forward, blasting back a score of Necrons while the sisters advanced. Ahead, Twilight could see the portal, still shimmering with power but flanked on either side by heavily armed Necrons. Naomi and Ruth took point, pouring fire into the machines that held the portal, but their bolters could only do so much against the living metal of the Necrons. The Necrons hammered her shield, heavier weapons leaving visible cracks in its surface. More of the Xenos machines warped in, mainly melee variants whose weapons could more reliably pass through Twilight's defense. They still held, but Twilight could feel her shield weakening with every strike. The portal was out of reach. They needed to get out of there. I need to teleport us out of here, Twilight said, shifting her shield once more to encompass the entire group. No, Miss Terra. Meerschaum said, striking down one Necron that managed to push through Twilight's shield. The Necron defenses could repel you. You could be killed. We're not going to get to the portal, and we can't fight off all these Necrons. Twilight countered, just as a blast of fire smacked into her shoulder. The magic within her armor held, but the purple metal noticeably thinned from the strike. Please, Meerschaum, I have to try. The Forgefather remained silent for several moments, regarding Twilight as she pleaded. It was impossible to tell his expression behind his helmet, but Twilight had seen enough to sense trepidation. Finally, just as another rank of Necrons crashed against her shield, he nodded. Whatever will save the unbound flame, and your life, he said. Twilight nodded, shifting her feet as she did her best to clear her mind. Immediately she could feel feedback pressing against her, a nulling wall pressing against her soul as she tried to break through. She grimaced, feeling more magic building up behind her with nowhere to go, her shield flickering and allowing more Necron fire to slip through. Terra? The shield's failing, called one sister. Twilight could not tell which one. What are you doing? Twilight screamed as she found a break, pouring all her power through the break so she and the others would make it through. There was a flash, and Trazin's gallery disappeared from view, replaced instead by the metal field of Solemnis's surface. They had come out on a small ridge, surrounded by two inactive pylons and a few stray scarabs clinging to the shadows. No true threats to be seen. For what it was worth. Twilight gasped, sinking down to the ground as the others tried to regain their focus. Naomi and Rebecca held each other up while Veronica ripped her helmet off and vomited, spitting out small droplets of bile and blood as she tried to regain her composure. "Tara," Naomi gasped. "What did you do?" I had to get us out," Twilight said, her voice no more than a hoarse whisper. "I'm sorry." Everything within her hurt, stabbing pain lancing through her lungs with every breath she took. A cough left a spray of blood on her lips, but she was too weak to wipe it away. She could not move, just stare blankly ahead as Rebecca hurried over to her, running the element of kindness down Twilight's body to try and heal whatever damage remained. As the sister remained there for almost a minute, it was quite a lot. "I can't see within you," Rebecca said. "But if this is telling me anything, you practically flayed yourself getting us out of there." Twilight said nothing, just taking a few shorter breaths now that the pain had died down. So focused was she on breathing again that she almost did not notice Rebecca smacking her across the face. "Don't ever do anything like that again." I won't," Twilight replied, taking Rebecca's hand as the sister helped her back to her feet. As Rebecca moved to the others, Twilight reached for her Vox. "Matthias? Matthias, are you there?" "Tara?" Matthias replied. "How did you get on the surface so fast? You didn't teleport, did you?" "That doesn't matter. Where's the ship?" "Magos Errol's been circling as best he can. I'm sending your coordinates." Matthias was cut off by a burst of static. "Damn it, they're targeting our comms. We'll get you back, Tara, just hang on for a little longer." "We will," Twilight replied, just as the Vox winked out. Suddenly the ground shook, the air ringing with the sound of twisting metal as something landed nearby. Twilight raised her shield again, spinning towards the source of the sound in preparation to fight. Standing over them was the red-skinned giant she had seen when treating Angelique, carried forward on blue feathered wings. He was twice as tall as Celestia, clad in armor of silver and gold that covered his chest and legs. A horned crown framed his face, holding back a thick mane of black hair that swept down his back. In his left hand he carried a long silver halberd, the khopesh-like blade wreathed in blue fire. His hands and feet were like a bird's feet, and Twilight could have sworn he had an extra eye in the palm of his right hand or not, considering he only had one eye on his face, the other socket a blank slate of red skin. The giant pulled himself up to his full height, glaring down at the humans as if they were naught but bothersome insects. The monster on the banks of the river Rin had been one thing. This was worse. "You," he rumbled, aiming his halberd at Twilight's head. "What are you, child?" Magnus watched passively as the first wave of Alfarius volunteers crashed against the Necron defenses. Strike cruiser and battle barges commanded by overeager traders and sleeper agents rushed towards the planet, only to be shot to pieces by the overwhelming firepower of Xenon's archaeotech. The actual forces of the Alpha Legion, along with a few other space hulks Magnus had enslaved to his will, remained at the edge of the battle, blasting away at whatever ships drew close. "Which one do you find to be the most expendable?" Alfarius said from behind him. "Does it matter?" Magnus asked. "They are not my sons, nor do you seem to have much care for them. Why should I care which ones you wish to sacrifice?" "While your point is well founded," the Primarch of the Alpha Legion replied. "If you were to choose, which one?" Magnus studied the fleet, tracing the outline of every remaining ship as they tried to cause some lasting damage to the Necron armada that stood in their way. In regards to battling the Xenos, speed and firepower were key, and any that lacked in either category were systematically singled out and torn asunder by gravity whips and massive Gauss relays. Already a ring of scrap had started to form around Solemnus, the final resting place for untold millions of Chaos worshippers martyring themselves before the guns of the Xenos. And they would love him for it, for their masters would make it to the surface. "That squadron," Magnus said, pointing to one group of strike cruisers at the edge of the melee. "They have not committed themselves because they see themselves redundant among the other squadrons." "An excellent choice," Alfarius said. "Can you do me a great favor and force them to crash into the planet?" Magnus quirked an eyebrow up at this, but for a scheme it was one of Alfarius' tamest. He reached out with his hand, casting his soul across the void until he touched the minds of the captains. "What is this?" one mind asked. "Have the dark gods come to witness my ascension?" "Hardly," Magnus replied, reaching further until he found the flickering lights of the captain's soul. A single push, and he had snuffed them to be replaced by constructs of his own. "Crash your ships into the planet and open your warp drives, for I have commanded it." "I do as I am commanded," the captains droned in unison. Slowly, the squadron broke from the ranks of their fellows, shimmering as they prepared their short jumps into warp space. Some of the Necron ships noticed the shift, some of their cruiser-class vessels moving to intercept, but it was too late. The Chaos vessels accelerated, flashing in and out of reality as the overtaxed warp drive sent them hurling towards the planet beneath. Magnus waited, watching the surface of Solemnus for any sign of activity. Finally, he saw several plumes of nuclear fire, breached reactors tearing at the surface of the planet as they detonated. Perfect! Alpharius cheered, giving Magnus a polite clap as he continued. Another strike like that and the Necron's shield will be weak enough for us to teleport down. Those Imperials had the right idea when they took down the world engine all those millennia ago. I could have opened the shield myself if you had asked, Magnus replied, picking out another squadron to hurl against the planet, selecting a few larger ships to make more of an impact. None of this petty waste of ships. Perhaps it is a bit wasteful, Alpharius said. But as the Necrons seemed adept at weeding out my sleeper agents, I have to use what is available to me. Magnus said nothing, watching as another squadron of ships began their suicide run towards Solemnus. The Necrons were more prepared now, a massive ship slicing two of the squadron in half with its weapons, but the remainder continued on their way to their doom even as the Necrons stripped them apart. Soon, several more nuclear plumes blossomed over Solemnus, Magnus feeling for the first time a subtle pulse upon the planet. Now, isn't that interesting? The shield is down, Alpharius said. Take your sons through before the Xenos close our window of opportunity. Magnus nodded, focusing his magic once more as he reached through the hold of the ship. 200 Rubric Marines and a couple thousand of Petru Arbos volunteers would make for a good vanguard to Alpharius' attack. The Xenos tech field strained against his power as he constructed portals on the surface. A mortal psyker would have been repulsed if not killed by the strength of the Necron's defenses, the potent mixture of Blackstone and alien technology working quickly to counter and nullify any residual warpcraft that tried to slip through. Magnus was no mortal, though. A portal opened before Magnus, the demon Primarch flying through with a single flap of his wings. The bridge of Alpharius' flagship disappeared, replaced by a wide field of blackened metal, legions of Necrons marching forward to counter the screaming hordes of cultists and the quiet ranks of Magnus' 1,000 sons. None seemed to have noticed him yet, giving him a chance to size up the battlefield. The cultists died, screaming praise to the Dark God and to the Primarchs as Necron Gauss weapons stripped them down to dust. Their rusty autoguns and stubbers did little against the alien metal, perhaps knocking down one or two in the unending legions of Xenos before their own ranks were slaughtered. Pressed on by taskmasters and the quietly advancing rubrics, the cultists had nowhere to go but forward, eager to try and gain some kind of glory before their ultimate demise. As the cultist screen collapsed, the rubrics entered the fray. Inferno bolt guns and Soul Reaper cannons blazed, their warp-enhanced ammunition slicing through the Necrons with ease. As with the autoguns, it was not enough to permanently kill the Xenos machines, but the rubrics' weapons did leave more lasting damage to the phalanx. Magnus would leave the chaff to his sons. The greater targets he would take for himself. Magnus channeled his magic as he dove down, targeting a command vehicle directing the phalanx as his first target. The Necrons had noticed him as he dove, but could not bring their weapons to bear before he struck, sweeping his blade through the vehicle and its occupant with little difficulty. The two halves of the vehicle skipped away from Magnus before exploding, showering the phalanxes with burning metal as Magnus advanced into the rear of the Necron lines. A blue shield deflected Gauss and Tesla fire, Magnus barely noticing as he sent a quartet of doom bolts hurtling towards an advancing spider-like walker. Magnus was not like Mortarion or Angron, who eagerly sought out the melee in combat. But he could still appreciate the thrill of it all. A beat of his wings carried him forward, Magnus smashing his halberd into the ground to disperse a rank of Lichguard. He brought his power forward as the Xenos machines reassembled themselves, blue flames blossoming out to melt those that had not been whisked away down to slag. More Necrons advanced to bring their weapons against him, Magnus dodging to the side before swiping his hand downward, a wall of force smashing into the machines from above. Magnus stepped back, bracing as heavier firepower smashed into his shield. He twisted his free hand over his head, lightning crackling in his palm as he drew in more power. 4 orbs of light appeared before him, each one flickering with the color of one of the fallen 4. Anywhere else, and each one would be a potent singularity to summon a greater demon into the battle. But with the nulling effects of the Necron shield and the copious amount of Blackstone, Magnus would have to employ a more brutish use. He flicked his hand, each orb of energy spinning as a low whine filled the air. Once a sufficient amount of energy had formed up, the Primarch cast them towards the Necron ranks, each one bouncing through the air until they found a suitable position overhead. They promptly imploded, reality itself ripping asunder as Blackstone, Necrons, and dead cultists were dragged into the warp, never to be seen again. All that remained were 4 glowing holes on the air, patches of unreality seeping through to try and snare any that dared stray close. Child's play. Magnus would have done more, but a flicker of magic in the distance drew his attention. At first he passed it off as some of Alfarius' minions or one of his sons attempting a more powerful spell, but the residual energies that is not chaos. He conjured another firestorm before backing away, finding a sorcerer among the ranks of the rubrics as the Necrons rallied for a second strike. "My lord," the sorcerer said, absorbing 1 Necron shot and returning it in a doombolt. "What is it that troubles you?" "There is a warp disturbance," he said. "I will investigate it and see if perhaps it might be turned for our purposes. Hold the line, we only need to distract the Xenos long enough for Alfarius to steal the anatheme." "As you command, my lord." Magnus took flight again, swooping over the ranks of allies and enemies alike in search of the source of the magic. The Necrons would be of no use, as their lack of souls meant they could do little to manipulate the warp, so he reached his senses out further, scouring every artificial break, monolith, and hill for sign of life. He finally spotted it nestled between 2 pylons to the north of his landing zone. The Necrons did not appear to have as heavy a position in this sector, so he did not need to worry about drawing too much attention for now. As he descended upon the source, Magnus sized up his opponents. The first was a member of the 18th Legion, easily distinguishable by his green armor, flame weapons, and drakescale cape. Beyond, Magnus could see a small grouping of those ridiculous brides of the Emperor dressed in black armor and red robes marked from decades of warfare, save for one that appeared to have a golden narthecium strapped to her wrist. They were crowded around a green coffin, marked with flames and nocturne script, no doubt a relic of Vulcans lost to the Xenos long ago. If Alfarius fails to secure the sword, this might make a welcome prize. But it was the final member of the Loyalists that caught Magnus' attention, a young woman dressed in lavender armor, a silver sword in one hand while the other maintained a violet psychic shield. Magnus reached out with his power, pressing against the shield just enough to get a feel for the energy the woman projected. It was her. The girl from the fleet. The one who had spoken against Lorgar. Alfarius Spark. Not even Vulcan's coffin would match to what he could glean from her. "You," he growled, aiming his blade at the woman. "What are you, child?" The girl did not answer, shying away from Magnus' blade as she met his gaze. He was prepared to advance on her before the Loyalist Astartes stepped between the two of them, preparing to receive whatever Magnus brought against him. "Loyalist," Magnus said, looking down at the Astartes. "You stand in my way. Move, and your deaths will be painless." "Never," the Astartes said, taking his spear in both hands. "We are faithful servants of the Empress, and will never yield to a monster like you." "That was not a request, fool." Magnus swept his blade low, a curtain of flames trailing after it as he struck against the salamander. The Astartes ducked away, but not quick enough to avoid the flat of Magnus' blade. There was a crunch of breaking ceramide as the Forgefather was lifted off his feet, his helmet and spear spinning away as he was knocked several meters to the Primarch's right. The man survived, groaning as he tried to pull himself back to his feet before crumpling back to the ground. "Mirchan!" the woman in lavender cried, dropping her shield as she rushed towards the fallen Astartes. Magnus swung his blade again, the girl leaping back as the head of the weapon crashed into the blackstone in front of her. "Do not think you can escape my gaze, child," he said, moving to place himself between the girl and his previous victim. "You are the girl who stared down Lorgar. I would commend you on your bravery, if we were not set against each other like this." The girl said nothing, swallowing as she took her sword in both hands. "You think to fight me?" "You hurt my friend," she said, her voice shaking ever so slightly. "I swear by all the power I have, you will not get away with that." "What power?" Magnus asked, sweeping his blade around and flaring his wings. "I am Magnus the Red, the mightiest sorcerer to grace the warp and the Imperium. Reality itself is beholden to my words, and the demons of all fallen gods dance to my tune. I have slain countless warriors greater than you, and yet you claim to be my doom? Come then, and show me what it is about you that makes my brothers fear you." Magnus took his blade in a two-handed grip and leapt forward, sweeping the halberd down towards the woman's head. She winked out in a burst of purple light, just as the blade would have split her from head to toe. Magnus snapped his head around, watching as the girl reappeared near a fallen pylon, flicking her hand forward toward Magnus. Magnus clenched his hand, his shield flaring to life just as the air around him exploded into a flurry of purple sparks. He rushed forward again, shifting his magic as green flames engulfed his fist, bearing down on the girl as she swept her left hand down across her body. With a roar, Magnus launched a great fireball, but the girl's speed enhancement allowed her to dance away from the attack with little difficulty. "Clever," Magnus said, striking out with his weapon but catching another shield for his trouble. You have a good sense of your power and the creativity to use it beyond mere parlor tricks. I would almost be impressed if you were not so feeble. He flicked his right hand open before closing it into a fist, blue tentacles materializing from the ground and lashing around the woman's legs and arms. He brought his fist downward, the tentacles yanking against the girl in an attempt to rip her apart. I tire of our game. Surrender now, or die. And never. Purple flames exploded around the girl, burning away Magnus' bindings as she drew back. She swept her hands down to channel more lightning, sparks running down her armor and sword before she launched it towards Magnus' head. He stepped back, reaching out his hand to catch the blast before crushing it into nothingness with his fist. The girl teleported again, but Magnus slammed the butt of his halberd into the ground, a shockwave racing out and knocking his opponent off her feet once she reappeared. Magnus raced forward, sweeping his halberd with one hand in a wild swing towards the woman. She raised a shield, which provided her only a few seconds of protection before Magnus struck, and while the defense deflected his blade, the shield shattered and left a sizable crater in the blackstone beneath her. The woman slumped over, stunned from the strike while Magnus loomed over her. Feeble, Magnus growled. If you are truly all the Emperor has to offer, I pity mankind. The woman pulled herself back to her feet, swaying slightly as she looked up at the demon Primarch. You still try to stand? You threaten the existence of humanity, and you hurt my friend. The woman said, taking up her sword in defiance. I'll do whatever it takes to stop you, even if I'm killed in the process. Typical Imperial psychosis, thinking that sacrificing yourself means anything to the survival of those around you. Magnus brought his blade around to stab the woman, but she teleported again and appeared closer to the fallen Astartes. She seemed more focused on helping him back to his feet than battling Magnus, giving the demon Primarch more than enough time to regroup and take stock of the situation. His fight had drawn attention. More exotic creatures of the Necrons, those ghost-like machines they called wraiths, had started to drift towards the fight in search of enemies to kill. Magnus was confident he could destroy them without much trouble, but doing so would risk allowing the Imperials to escape. One opponent at a time. Magnus stalked forward, shifting his power so his halberd morphed into a full khopesh. The salamander stepped forward, taking his spear in both hands while the girl and her fellows worked to move the unbound flame away from the battle. Get out of my way, loyalist, Magnus growled. Or must I strike you down a second time? You strike only flesh, demon. The salamander replied, raising his spear to his shoulder. I am Mirshan, son of Vulcan, defender of the Imperium and champion of the Empress. I will never succumb to you, no matter what wounds you strike me with. As stubborn as ever, aren't you? Magnus focused, a bolt of pure energy shooting forward from the gap between the horns on his head. The Astartes leapt aside, barely avoiding the bolt as it melted the blackstone beneath him to slag. Magnus wanted to avoid the man and charge straight at the girl, lest she get away with the unbound flame, but the salamander was not so easy to put down. He rolled back to his feet and lashed out, his spear flickering as it passed through Magnus' defenses and sank into his thigh. The demon Primarch held, wrenching his leg back as the salamander staggered forward, always keeping himself between the retreating women and Magnus. Insolent worm, Magnus bellowed, conjuring up more power. Tendrils lashed around the Astartes' legs, and unlike the girl he had no powers of his own to break through. Do what your misbegotten ilk were designed for and die. For my friends, I do so gladly, the Astartes said, calmly closing his eyes as Magnus launched a doom bolt towards his head. It was not a particularly powerful doom bolt, not even for the Primarch, but it was still more than enough to punch through the loyalist's skull and down through his body, exploding his armor outward so all that remained was his cloak, the gauntlet, and his spear. Said artifacts were knocked through the air, skidding across the ground until they came to a rest next to the woman and her group. To see the despair on the girl's face was a sight Magnus had seen played out countless times across the centuries, a hollow gaze, broken by shimmering tears, whatever light of hope having been shattered beyond repair. Magnus had once served the god of hope and change, yet to see this one broken. You should have known better than to place your trust in the strength of that lot, he said, resuming his march towards the humans. The women in black armor raised their weapons, Magnus using only the slightest amount of power to deflect the bolter shells. The only power is that which you possess within, and I find it lacking. Don't worry, I'll make this painless. Magnus whipped his sword over his head, a curtain of fire forming before he sent it hurtling towards the Imperials. It should have been a quick kill. Even the greatest of psychers would have trouble holding back the torrent. But before the flames could connect, the enemy psycher let out a feral shriek and thrust her hands forward, a bolt of pure magic blasting apart Magnus' attack and streaking through the air towards him. Magnus reeled back as the bolt exploded in his face, purple flames digging into his flesh and hissing as his magic tried to contain them. Most warp flame burned like the real thing until properly extinguished, but this, if anything, it tickled, a quick soothing feeling following soon after the initial flash of pain. Magnus would have been fascinated, were it not for the fact the damn flames had burned his eye. "I am losing my patience with you," he roared, slamming his sword against the ground to create a wall of force. The strike knocked the Imperials over, preventing them from attacking him once more as he conjured another doombolt. "Your skill is substantial, but your fighting is pointless. Now witness the true power of the warp." Magnus launched the doombolt forward, pouring as much hatred and malice as he could into the spell. There was a flash followed by a deafening explosion, several curious wraiths bowled over by the force of the blast. As the dust cleared, Magnus rushed forward to finish off any that remained. But as he charged through the smoke, all he found was thin air, not a single sign of the presence of the girl and her followers save for a small pinprick of violet light. Magnus paused, dismissing his sword as he reached down to pluck the light from thin air, turning it over in his hand several times to get a feel for its energies. "It is still strong," he mused. "That means she's still alive, some kind of teleportation over long distance. Interesting." He would have loved to inspect the magic more closely, but the wraiths chose that moment to attack, whipping their coiled blades at the Primarch as he brought his shield to deflect them. He took flight, wrenching a nearby pylon out of the ground and hurling it at the machines, but they merely phased through it in their quest to attack the Primarch. Magnus, it was Alfarius, using a psyker to communicate with him. "We are being hard pressed. Where are you?" "Apologies. I thought I saw something that could have been of use. I will resume our attack." Alfarius' minions said nothing, allowing Magnus a moment to cast a fireball at the wraiths and turn back towards the battlefield. In the distance, he could feel the spark of the girl's magic once more, a faint light amongst the darkness of Solemnus, but he forced the thought from his mind. Hunting the girl could wait. For now, he had a mission to complete. Chapter 2.19, Angels of Death, Part 2. The rock shuddered as it broke out of the warp, its escorts winking into existence soon after as the Imperial Armada descended upon Agrippina. A small fleet of Mechanicus ships remained in orbit, trying desperately to hold off an unending onslaught of Chaos battleships, cruisers, and other twisted craft of unknown class. Beyond, a great rift had blossomed in space, the twisting currents of the warp laid bare for all to see. A good many soldiers would lose their sanity before the day was up if they focused on the rift. Corax, though, was unimpressed. Still trying to intimidate those who have fought them for centuries, he mused, turning back to where the lion and his bodyguards were prepping their weapons. The minions of Chaos are simple, with but a few tricks about them. The Primarch of the Dark Angels replied, strapping his sword to his belt before looking to Corax. "Once we shore up the defenses of the Forge world, we can press on and perhaps roll back some of this madness. Without the Empress, closing the Eye of Terror will be a mite more difficult than simply killing many traitors and moving on. There are always ways to advance, Corax, even if they are not apparent at first." "Of course." Corax crossed his arms as he inspected the display of the battlefield again. "I am not a child that needs constant instructing, Johnson." Already the first of the Imperial fleet had engaged with the forces of Chaos, strike cruisers and destroyers hammering each other with massive broadsides as larger vessels held back for longer shots. The rock continued on regardless, archaeotech weapons blasting through even the strongest of Chaos vessels as it made its way towards Agrippina. "The plan is simple," the Lion said, dismissing the display of the space battle for Agrippina proper. "The traitors push in against the central forge, and the Mechanicus are holding as well as they can. My sons and I shall reinforce the forge and press out from there. The Mechanicus might not have the resources to support an advance," Corax replied. "Perhaps, but we shall not be hindered. And your assistance will be appreciated," Corax said nothing as Johnson shifted the map to some smaller factories. "The traitors have a number of landing zones in this area near the lesser forges, no doubt so they can repair their demon-enhanced machines. A full assault could clear it but would waste resources, but if you lead a smaller strike to destabilize them it can slow the assault on the main forge and allow us some time to rebuild." "I will need all the air support you can provide," Corax looked to Johnson. "But then I suppose you have already worked out their deployments?" "You will have most of our close air support, for destroying those landing zones will take priority. With the traitors on the back foot we can continue to press against them." "Of course." Corax fell silent, his gaze shifting towards his brother Primarch. The Lion did not meet Corax's gaze, though he did frown before speaking. "You resent me for taking on the role of War Master in this battle," Johnson said. "Do I look like Dorn or Guilliman?" Corax countered. This seemed to throw Johnson for a moment, allowing Corax to continue. I am not one to be flattered by titles or positions, Johnson. I truly wouldn't care if the Empress declared you heir apparent tomorrow and then wandered off to some agri-world to become a farmer. Ha! That would be a sight. The lion snorted. My trepidation is in placing the responsibilities of so many on the shoulders of one, especially at times such as this when we are so divided. Corax looked back to the map. That has not proven to be an effective strategy for the Imperium in the past, and far be it for us to indulge in the mistakes that nearly toppled mankind. The Empress has placed her trust in us, the lion countered. To have any trepidation at this point is to invite the possibility of cowardice. We must take action and power as it is offered, or our enemies will exploit our weaknesses beyond our control. I thought as much once. Corax shifted slightly before continuing. My failures during the heresy led me to think otherwise. Johnson remained silent, keeping his eyes fixed on the display as Corax looked on. Finally he turned away, signaling to his fellow Dark Angels as they prepped for war. I must go to prepare the defense of Agrippina, the lion said, moving to the first wave of Thunderhawks as Corax followed behind. The bridge has their orders, and a new flight of ships will be ready for you soon. I trust your sons will be up to the task of disrupting the landing zones? You doubt my sons, Johnson? Corax asked. I doubt most everything, Corax, that is why I have succeeded where others failed. There was a pause as the lion stopped on the ramp of the Thunderhawk. Corvus, there is something in the armory at the far end of the hall. Make sure it is taken care of before you leave. It is fine to say you are presenting me with a gift, Johnson, Corax started, but the lion waved him off. I have said what is needed. Now, we have a planet to save and traitors to kill. And with that he disappeared into the hold of the Thunderhawk, Corax stepping back to give the dropship some room as its fellows, and their escorts took off to relieve the Forge world below. The Primarch of the Raven Guard stayed there for several minutes, as if expecting Johnson to return and apologize for being so curt. It has been months since you have seen Terra, and already you think like her, Corax thought before shaking his head. The student can wait. Now, to the business of war. Corax turned away, heading towards the armory the lion had indicated. It was an open-air setup, flanked by several Predator tanks to give the tech priests some semblance of boundaries. One of the leading adepts spotted Corax as he approached, bowing low as the Primarch came to a stop. My lord, the tech priest said. The lion told us that you would grace us with your presence, and has provided a gift for which you may strike down the enemy. Not in so many words, but yes. Corax nodded. The tech priest glided back through the armory, Corax following until they stopped before a display that held two large plasma pistols. Unlike most plasma weaponry the Imperium possessed, these possessed more rounded barrels and a proportionally shorter heating coil, a more alien look that Corax had not seen in millennia. Relics from before the heresy, recovered at the lion's order, the tech priest said. He noted how you were missing those pistols the Empress had gifted you, and felt that these might make for fine replacements. Corax said nothing, reaching out to take the pistols on his hands. They were slightly heavier than his old Archaeotech pistols, but still far lighter than any other gun he had seen since he had lost those weapons. He turned the weapons in his hands, just enough to get used to their weight before clamping them to his belt. Send my compliments to the lion, should you encounter him again before I do, Corax replied. I will do as you ask, my lord, the tech priest bowed again before wandering off through the armory, Corax turning and heading back into the hangar as a new flight of Thunderhawks was prepped. The rock shuddered from some kind of impact, a few chapters surf stumbling as they brought more supplies to the Astartes. Corax flipped on his Vox. Bridge? What is the situation? We are taking fire from the enemy fleet, my lord, came the response. It is a minor inconvenience, nothing more, but Corax waited but got no response. But? My lord Johnson did not say anything about a second fleet attacking the traitors. They bear the colors of Fenris. Space wolves? The lion will not be pleased with that. Have you tried making contact with them? Corax asked. They are ignoring all hails at this point, but as they remain focused on the enemy we have not taken their actions as hostile. Shall we try again? Corax paused, mulling over the best actions to take, especially considering the general mistrust between the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves. No. If I encounter the Sons of Rus, I will handle diplomacy. And hopefully that will keep the lion placated for a while. By now a collections of veterans under Shadow Captain Cornix had assembled, slowly making their way into the Thunderhawks while the captain awaited his Primarch. We are at your command, my lord, the Shadow Captain said. Good. Corax replied, starting up the ramp as Cornix slipped his helmet on. I presume the Lion's representatives have already detailed our mission to you? Striking the traitors' landing zones. It is a mission my brothers have conducted many times. A pause as Cornix took a spot next to Korax. Although perhaps not directly in the jaws of the beast as we are now. Traitors, Xenas, they are all alike in the end, Korax replied. Just another obstacle that mankind must face in whatever forms it is presented. Stay close to me and we will see this day through. Yes, my lord. The Raven Guard fell silent after that, keeping their eyes forward as the Thunderhawks lifted off for their descent upon Argypina. Were Korax more like Russ or even Horus, he would have said more, some grand speech to get his soldiers worked up into a fervor before they fell in among the enemy, but words failed him again. Even Terra would have more to say. As they entered the atmosphere, the Thunderhawk began to shake. My lord, we are taking fire, the pilot called from ahead. Interceptors have broken through our defensive screen. We are taking evasive action. Just get us as close to the target as possible. Korax replied, any further response cut off by gunfire and a demonic shriek. None of the Raven Guard veterans flinched as the Thunderhawk was buffeted by strikes from outside, merely flicking their weapons into activation as they drew closer to the target. Korax himself plucked one of the plasma pistols off his belt, listening as the hum of the weapon filled the cabin of the Thunderhawk. A beep, and the landing ramp opened to a hellscape. Agrippina was much like any other Forge world, a massive factory floor stretched out across the entire planet. Vents and foundries belched smoke into the atmosphere, creating a perpetual cloud of smog around the planet. The industrial landscape had been ravaged, giant obelisks of obsidian bursting through the ground while pools of lava and melted metal collected around their base. Glowing portals of warp energy hung in the air around the spires, tendrils snaking out to take forms of demons and other vicious creatures the traitors planned to use for their invasion. A number of larger transports had already set down, cultists and traitor marines marching out to make war upon the Imperium once more. They did not yet realize war would arrive sooner than they anticipated. Quick strike on the transports, Korax said, preparing to jump from the ramp. Once we have drawn the traitors' focus, we will split up and strike valued targets, foundries, portals, anything the traitors may use for resupply. Do not engage for longer than you need. Yes, Lord Korax, the veterans replied, just as the Thunderhawk shook violently from a strike. The Astartes kept their balance easily enough, but the Thunderhawk began to drop quickly towards the ground. We've been hit, the pilot replied. You must jump now, my lord. I will make sure my sacrifice is meaningful. I would rather not sacrifice you at all, Korax thought, but the pilot knew his craft far more than the Primarch. Who was he to correct if the Thunderhawk was crippled? May the Empress guide you, my friend, he said before jumping forward, his jump pack firing as he leapt clear of the stricken flyer. His veterans followed soon after, the last jumping clear before a flak missile gutted the Thunderhawk, the ship disintegrating in a ball of fire as it and a few of its fellows plunged towards the ground. Unlike the orcs, always eager to attack the biggest and most dangerous-looking thing they could see, the forces of chaos were more precise in their targeting. Smaller machine guns and light autocannons quickly turned on the descending veterans, the sky lit up from hundreds of tracer rounds and demonically enhanced shells. Korax could disappear from the sight of the traitors, but his sons had to quickly duck and dive to avoid getting hit. The Primarch spotted the anti-air weapons, scores of cultists and corrupted Mechanicus thralls passing ammunition and weapons to waiting gunners. Korax shifted his angle, diving down towards the gun emplacements as he freed the second plasma pistol from his belt. The gunners still had not noticed him, keeping all of their focus on the descending veterans even as he bore down upon them. He picked one of the larger gun emplacements before shifting again, drawing back as he leveled his pistols. Korax fired, bright blue bolts of charged plasma streaking out towards the traitors. 3 of the traitors toppled over dead, chests and heads blasted open from Korax's attack. The gunners tried to turn their weapons towards the Primarch, but Korax surged forward before they could fully take aim, letting off another burst of fire before storing one pistol away and activating his lightning claws. The first traitor, a marine armed with a blood-caked chain axe, had only enough time to raise his weapon before Korax plunged his claws into his opponent's skull. He barely broke pace as he surged forward, smashing a dark Mechanicus thrall across the face with a backhand from his other hand before stomping a cultist into paste. He drew his claws from the dead traitor marine and struck again, slashing one marine across the chest before blowing the traitor's head off with a point-blank shot to the face. The traitors turned to run, but Korax was upon them before they had a chance to flee. Stowing away his pistol, he ripped one cultist in half before slamming one half of the corpse into the face of one of his fellows. In that same motion he tore through a second traitor marine, the Astartes' left arm and upper torso hitting the ground a meter away from where the rest of his body landed. One last Marine struck back, his chainsword scraping harmlessly across Corax's chest before the Primarch grabbed him by the throat and squeezed, the Marine falling limp as Corax crushed his throat. He tossed the corpse aside, surveying the battlefield as the rest of his sons reached their targets. Cornyx led the charge, bashing aside a possessed word-bearer with his shield as his veterans darted towards the unsuspecting transports. The meltabombs could not kill the things from the outside, but sufficient damage would slow the progress of the traitors' relief. That was the hope, at least. Corax knew not to trust hope. He jumped off the gun emplacement, his pack flaring as he descended upon a charging rank of Chaos Marines. The first was crushed underneath his boots, 2 more dying from his initial strikes as he charged onward. The others in the squad tried to face him, but their bolters could only do so much before Corax left a pile of broken corpses in his wake. He disappeared again, skirting through the shadows as he searched for a tempting target. He found one in a word-bearer's lord leading a larger group of cultists and possessed Marines. The traitor held aloft a thick book in one hand, a bloodied power maul in the other, and the dark words he spoke were grating on Corax's ears as he drew closer. The demagogue urged his followers forward, the tide of traitors crashing down upon Cornyx and his squad as the veterans set a trio of meltabombs to take out the landing skid of a medium transport. Corax leapt into the air, using his jump pack to position himself over the horde before revealing himself and diving downward. The cultists had little time to scatter before Corax struck, the minions of chaos pleading to their gods to save them as Corax advanced on the possessed. Warped by the demonic entities that had taken hold of their bodies, these monstrosities hissed as they crashed against Corax, swiping and clawing at him with claws and mutated weapons while their lord looked on. "Revel in the slaughter, my brothers!" The word-bearer bellowed, even as Corax tossed aside one of the possessed like a bothersome rat. "The dark god of our father Lorgar has blessed you with the skill of 1,000 lifetimes, the ferocity of 10,000 men. Strike down the followers of the corpse emperor, the lapdogs that dare turn away the light of the dark god." Corax said nothing, ramming his claws through the throat of a possessed Marine. The Chaos Lord seemed to have plenty of bodies to throw at the Primarch, such that Corax could draw no closer no matter how many he killed. Momentum was fading. Corax needed to break out sooner. As he finished off another possessed Marine, ripping off one of its pincher-tipped arms and smashing it through the faceplate of a second traitor, Corax spotted something flickering through the smoke. Drop pods, from the looks of things, the teardrop-shaped craft hurtling towards the ground at high speed. The Chaos Lord spotted them too, calling to more of his fellows as the new arrivals drew closer. "Johnson did not alert me to drop pods, but then, when has he ever divulged his full plans?" Corax jumped back, kicking off one possessed that had hooked its claws into a seam of his armor, just as the first drop pod hit the ground. He almost paused when he realized it was painted in the light gray of the space wolves. He definitely paused when its occupant broke out with a roar once the doors fell open. He was scruffier than Corax remembered, his gray armor almost worn down to base ceramite, but Corax could not deny the imposing figure of Leman Russ as the Wolf King tore into the ranks of the traitors. Each sweep from his sword cleaved a score of the enemy in two, their crimson blood splashing across Russ' armor as the Primarch gleefully charged towards the Chaos Lord. The Lord rose to meet Russ, his power maul flickering as he lunged into the fight. "A challenger. One more body to see the light." The word-bearer crowed. "Come, you sons of wolves. See now the might of the dark god, who has blessed us with battle this day." "Oh, shut up, you inbred pup," Russ shouted, stabbing his sword through the word-bearer's chest before burying his axe deep into the traitor's head. Corax snapped out of his daze, decapitating a closing possessed before he leapt forward. "Russ," Corax said, keeping his voice low as he approached. By now other space wolves had arrived, Grey Hunters and Terminators plunging in to give their lord a little more room to direct. "Corax," Russ cried, giving Corax a wide smile. "My God, you look terrible. 15,000 years have not done well for your complexion. But never mind that, where were you these last years?" "I could ask the same question about you," Corax replied, drawing one of his pistols and firing into a rank of traitors that had moved to flank the new arrivals. "I had heard you were dead." "Rumors, only," Russ laughed, turning back to the battle before whipping his weapons around. "I shall regale you and your sons tonight with the tales of my escapades. A fine feast we shall have, but first, to battle. Our victory over these cowards will make our saga all the more greater." Corax could think of several counters to that statement, but Russ was already on the move and unlikely to listen to his brother's objections. He gleefully charged into the center of the fray, a growing line of bisected Chaos Marines in his wake as his sons did their best to keep up. More Chaos Marines entered the battle, pouring fire into the ranks of the arriving loyalists as zealots and monsters charged into the melee. Korax allowed himself a moment's respite, content to let the newly arrived Fenrisians tear through the tide of traitors. Leman Russ had returned, another Primarch to bear the weight of the Empress' commands, and even now Korax could see the Wolf King was more than ready to take up such a burden. The Lion would no doubt be displeased at the Wolves' arrival, but such a matter could be dealt with given the pressing might of chaos. Perhaps, Korax thought. Perhaps that is why I still doubt. Lord Korax, Captain Cornix said through the Vox, snapping Korax out of his thoughts. Your orders? Stay the course. Korax replied, marching towards the melee of Chaos worshippers and Fenrisians. He spotted Russ in the center, grappling with a blood-splattered demon prince as his wolf guard poured fire into a charging rank of berserkers. But try and make sure the wolves don't kill themselves in the process. We will do what we can. Matthias braced as another broadside slammed into the side of the Sanguinium martyrs. The cruiser pitched to the right, the Inquisitor watching as the Chaos Destroyer bearing down on them blasted away another battery of his ship's guns. The Imperials were not helpless, though, as the traitor's companion blossomed into a cloud of fire as one last salvo of torpedoes detonated in its engines. Small victories, concerning other Chaos and Necron vessels had started to close on the inquisitorial cruiser. Has there been any word from Magos Errol? He shouted into the closest Vox. That last hit destroyed our long-range comms, my lord, came the reply. We have been unable to locate Magos Errol, Lady Terra, or Lord Meerschain. Damn it. The ship shuddered from another strike, Matthias grabbing a nearby relay to avoid falling. Keep us close to the planet as possible, and get our shields back online. Yes, my lord. There was a burst of static, Matthias looking up as another volley of missiles smashed into the Chaos Destroyer. Heavy shells exploded against the corrupted vessel's bow, but still the enemy bore down on the Sanguinium martyrs, its own cannons firing downward on the cruiser's superstructure. The two vessels continued their deadly dance through the void, a trail of shattered armor and broken guns following them as they tried and failed to land a decisive hit on the other. Just as well, Matthias thought. We need to be here for Twilight and the others. Another lurch, and Matthias could feel the ship began to stall. Engines 4 and 1 have been hit, my lord. The Vox crackled. We are trying to compensate, but that will cost us speed. Just get us into a position where we can finally kill this traitor. We can worry about damage control later. Matthias did not need a reply, the captain knew his mission, and the cruiser had not failed him once since Matthias had taken command. The Sanguinium martyrs stabilized, slowing ever so slightly to allow the traitor an opportunity to cut in front. Right into the firing arc of the cruiser's heaviest weapons. The Imperials did not waste a moment, a swarm of torpedoes streaking out in the path of the destroyer. The traitors had little time to maneuver, the ship rising up in a vain attempt to dodge before the torpedoes struck home. There was a ripple of explosions across the bow of the destroyer before all were consumed by a massive fireball, the forward magazine of the destroyer detonating and casting thousands to their doom. The hammering volley on the Sanguinium martyrs ceased, the Imperials watching the Chaos vessel's death throes in silence. There was no time to celebrate, as a Chaos cruiser and its escorts had broken from the melee to engage the crippled Sanguinium martyrs, a few macrocannon shots flying high over the inquisitorial cruiser. Matthias braced again, the ship rocking as it drew away from the encroaching traitors. My lord, the Vox crackled again. With our engines damaged we can only make half speed. The traitors will have us in range within the hour, Matthias said nothing. His ship could take more punishment, sure enough, but it would not win a protracted fight against the traitors. If this is where I am martyred, Empress, he prayed. I only wish for my sacrifice to have a greater impact on your mission than I can see. We have received a communication with Magos Errol, Matthias snapped out of his prayer. He is requesting to speak with you. Pass it through. There was a pause before Errol's metallic voice came through. Lord Velos, the Magos said. Lady Terra and the sororitas assigned to her have recovered the unbound flame. We are beginning our final approach now. Good, Matthias replied, doing his best to regain his calm. Complications? Lord Meerschain was killed in battle. From what I have witnessed, Lady Terra managed to recover his weapons. Damn. A pause before Matthias continued. How is TW Terra taking this? I am not one to comment on such emotions. Perhaps that is something you can address. We are beginning the docking procedure now. Matthias nodded to reassure himself before switching the Vox channel. Bridge, he said. When Magos Errol has docked, take us into the warp. My lord, the damage the ship has taken is severe. Entering the warp without a full diagnostic would be no worse than having Chaos or the Necrons take this vessel and kill the Empress student. When the Magos has docked, take us into the warp. Yes, my lord. Matthias closed the Vox, looking down at the floor. The ship groaned as it came about, technicians doing their best to prep for warp travel while silencing any warning klaxons that might prove distracting. The Chaos vessels fired again, a lance bolt shearing off a section of armor from the Sanguinium Martyr's superstructure as the corrupted ships closed in. All hands, prepare for warp transit, a voice called. Activating drive in 3, 2, 1. One final lurch, Matthias barely mustering the strength to steady himself, and the cruiser plunged into the tides of the warp. Briefly Matthias could feel the pull of a reality, whispers of demons and foul gods brushing against his mind as his vision blurred, but the Geller field of the cruiser flashed to life and gave a moment's peace to those crew that still lived for now. "My lord," the Vox chimed. "Given the damage our ship has taken, I cannot keep us in the warp for very long, especially with our navigator not responding to my hails." "Just as long as we are out of reach of traitors and Xenos alike," Matthias replied, feeling his head droop as if a heavy weight were tied around his neck. The mission had almost failed, Twilight killed by some alien or heretic soldier that was a prospect Matthias could not even begin to imagine. Finally, he lifted his head, turning and walking out of the command bridge and down the hall towards the hangar. Scars of battle were not hard to find, crew members helping wounded comrades towards the infirmaries while priests tended to the dead and dying. Sections of the main hall had been opened to the void during the battle, blast doors having sealed off great swaths of the path to keep the ship's integrity stabilized. None of the others paid him any attention, even as he stepped lightly around overturned crates of supplies and the pulped bodies of those caught under broken machinery. The walk to the hangar was a longer one, Matthias finally stepping out into the atrium after what could have been an eternity. The cutter was there, perfectly parked despite the wreckage around it, Magos Errol and his tech thralls already on the move to greet him. Matthias could also see the white-clad form of Sister Bianca rushing from one of the other halls, but the tech priest drew his attention first. "Lord Velas," Errol droned, turning over a data disk in his hand before passing it to Matthias. "This holds all the information I gathered from our arrival to when the heretics attacked." The cutter managed to remain out of sight, though Lady Terra's actions did make it trying to recover her and the artifact. "Actions?" "Terra teleported us nearly halfway across the planet," Sister Naomi said, breaking past Bianca and coming up behind Errol. "We were attacked by a greater demon during the fighting. Lord Mershan was killed in the struggle." "I was informed," Matthias said quietly. There was a lengthy pause before he spoke again. "How is Terra?" "See for yourself." Naomi stepped back while Errol and his entourage drifted off through the ship, allowing Matthias a better view of the others. The sisters had pushed a giant coffin down to the floor, Bianca quickly checking them for any sign of injury. All of them bore some kind of scar across their armor, ranging from small flakes of chipped paint to large sections having been stripped away by the Necron's weapons. Fortunately, all of them appeared uninjured. That just left Twilight out of their number. She stood silently at the top of the gangplank, staring blankly out into space. In her arms she clutched the relics of the late Mershan, the Astarte-sized weapons making her look like a child playing with their parents' clothes and tools. It would have been an amusing sight were it not for the completely shattered look on her face, her eyes glassy and unfocused as she stared out across the hangar. Matthias wanted to approach her, to reassure her that the Forgefather's sacrifice would be worth it in the end, but he could not muster up the strength to move. "And why not?" a voice in his mind asked. "You did so well comforting her on Caesarea." "Mershan's dead," she said, her voice a barely audible whisper. "I know," Matthias replied. "Terra, if there's anything we can do." "No, there isn't." Twilight shook her head, blinking a few times as she came down the gangplank and quickly set the relics at the base of the unbound flame. "Just put these relics with the other one. I think this was what Mershan wanted. I'll be in my room." Terra, hiding away like this won't make Sister Judith started, but Twilight was already on the move. "I will be in my room. Let me know when I am needed." "But you are the sister," started, but Twilight was already out of earshot. Matthias watched Judith, noting the sister rocking on her feet and clenching her hands in anxiety. She even started off after Twilight before Sister Naomi stopped her. "Give her some time to mourn, Judith," the Sister Superior said. "If she persists in this manner, then you may speak with her." Judith hesitated, her hands still clenching together as she looked between Naomi and the spot where Twilight had been. Finally she nodded, tension flowing out of her body as she and her fellow sisters looked to Matthias. The Inquisitor remained silent, his eyes darting between the sisters as he tried to come up with the best possible explanation for their current predicament. No doubt they had some idea of the damage they had taken from the heretics' attack, and with Twilight as she was they needed some form of stability to fall back on. Yet Matthias had no clear answer. All he had was evasion.